Today, we're going to be doing a reaction video to Carl Lentz's first podcast that he did with his wife, Laura Lentz. They launched back at the beginning of June a podcast, I believe called The Lights On. It's on the B-Side app, and they have started by sharing a few different videos about what Carl and Laura have went through at Hillsong and what their recovery process was like and things like that. What's up, guys? Welcome to my channel. I'm Cassie Marie, and this is No Culty Vibes, where we talk about all things cults, pop culture, and trending topics. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, make sure you are subscribed, you hit the like button, you hit the bell so you get notifications every time we post a new video and talk about all things culty. If you're watching this type of reaction video, I am going to assume that you know what I'm talking about, but just in case you don't or you want a brief reminder, Carl Lentz was a famous pastor of the Hillsong megachurch in New York, where several celebrities frequently attended, including Justin Bieber and several of the Kardashians. And he had a huge fall from grace when a scandal surfaced that he was cheating on his wife with multiple women. And not only that, he was cheating on her with their nanny. Their nanny accused him of SAing her and using his influence and power to coerce her into a relationship with him. And Carl has been accused by several others of spiritual abuse and manipulation as well, and just an all-around culture at Hillsong, New York, of a really toxic environment, which there have been two different Hillsong documentaries about this. Hillsong was originally founded in Australia by a man named Brian Houston, who had scandals of his own that came out. So this really is a culture of toxicity, abuse, spiritual abuse, manipulation, coercion, and it is a extremely cult-like environment. When Carl Lentz's cheating scandal came to light, Hillsong, New York all but fell apart, and the Lentzes retreated to first California and then Florida to kind of go into hiding and then rebuild their life. At first, the Lentzes did different jobs outside of ministry, outside of the church, but about a year ago, Carl Lentz was hired back onto staff at Transformation Church in, is it Oklahoma? I believe is where that is. Apparently, he does not have a forward-facing role and is not a pastor or a leader in any way, but is merely consulting and serving in an advisory capacity, likely for things like marketing. I've talked about Carl Lentz being hired to Transformation Church in the past. I think it is a really bad move for several of the things that he has been accused of. I don't think he should be on staff at church at all, whether it's in a pastoral position, leadership position, whatever. I don't think, based on several of the allegations, that he is fit to lead a spiritual community or be looked up to as someone with any type of authority at all in a spiritual community. Carl and Laura repeatedly have said and continue to say that they do not wish to return to ministry in any capacity, that him being on staff at Transformation Church is not returning to ministry. But then they launched this podcast, which again, they say is not a return to ministry. It's more just talking about the difficulties and trials that they've gone through and hopes to help someone else. But the company that runs this podcast platform, the B-Side, it is a Christian app that platforms several pastors and Christian speakers that talk about different aspects of Christianity and ministry. So while Carl and Laura insist that they are not returning to any kind of leadership capacity, they continue to position themselves in positions of leadership in spiritual communities and Christian communities, and are very much staying inside the world in which they fell from grace, in which Carl fell from grace. Laura, I have complicated feelings about, and we will probably talk more about that as we do this reaction video. The biggest issue I have with the Lentzes is that since they've been hired on at Transformation Church, and since they are promoting this podcast that they launched at the beginning of June and have gone on several other podcasts and are going around speaking and talking about things again, is that they have solely boiled down the issues that Carl faced as pastor of Hillsong as him cheating on his wife in a consensual relationship. And while, yes, there was one consensual relationship or multiple consensual relationships where he was having affairs outside of his marriage, Leona Kimes, their nanny, also accused him of sexual assault and of using coercion and manipulation to cultivate a relationship with her that she may or may not have wanted at the time. And like I said at the beginning of this video, there have also been several allegations of spiritual abuse and a toxic work environment and manipulation and coercion. There were many, many more cult like red flags of Hillsong in general and Hillsong New York, other than Carl Lentz having affairs. In fact, I've heard people who have attended Hillsong New York say that his affairs are the least of their concerns. So, in my opinion, Carl Lentz is not actually owning up to the majority of the issues that people had with him as pastor of Hillsong LA. He is just pointing to the one obvious thing that he was caught doing that he could no longer hide from, and is only admitting to that, working through that, talking about that, thinking about that, and believes that in these last 4 short years that he's done enough to work through that. And I just find it feels like he's gaslighting us. It feels like he's gaslighting the people that went to Hillsong New York and everyone else as to what the actual issues are that we have with Carl Lentz as a pastor, as a leader, as a speaker, as a podcast host, as anyone in a position of power, position of authority. I figured many of us are curious. There are several episodes of this podcast that have come out since June, but I figured we would just dive into this first one. I haven't seen it yet, and just kind of react to it together, see what we think, and talk about some of the things that Carl and Laura are leaving out of this conversation. And then I will probably be done with talking about the Lentzes at all unless they start apologizing for other things or start saying some other really crazy things that I think we should address and hold them accountable for. Really quick before we dive in, we have a really great community of people, followers, friends on TikTok, and I'm trying to cultivate that community over here on YouTube as well. So if you are interested in more reaction videos, all things cults and pop culture, make sure you are subscribed and you hit that bell button to get notifications. As always, I love to hear your thoughts on any of these topics. So let me know in the comments below if you have similar feelings about the Lentzes, different feelings, or what you think as we are watching and reacting to this video together.
And you don't have any idea about my life, my wife, Laura, the Lentz family. We have been out of the public life and sphere for a couple of years now. Actually, it's moving on about 4 years. And we went through some things as a family that some people know about, other people don't. But we're going to use everything we've been through to hopefully bring some new life and some new hope to people. And what you're going to see on these first couple episodes, especially this first one, you're going to see a couple that is healed and healing. And it hadn't been the case always for us. We haven't been at a place where we've been able to talk about our own life and our own pain. And we are now. So when you see us going through this story, we're looking to the future. Cannot wait to talk about other things, but it's irresponsible for us not to talk about what happened because it was so public. And I think it's fair to be able to open it up and allow people to take from it what they can. So in this first episode, we're going to answer some questions that a lot of people have, like, why has it taken us so long to talk? Why is Laura still married to me? Who's at fault? Yeah, we handle some of the real hard questions. And our hope with this whole thing is that you can look at what's happened in our life and maybe you can recognize a little bit of your story in ours, and together we can all grow. So the future of the podcast is going to be me bringing on people that I love, that have changed my life, that have helped me heal, that are helping me heal. And that's the future. But the right now, this is our story. So for those of you that are brand new to this, we used to be a ministry. I made some mistakes that cost us a lot, and we talk about it all. And now we're here. We're in this space, and I'm really excited about it. So thank you for checking it out. Episode 1. Hope you enjoy it.
Okay, so I agree that they should address these things before they try to platform themselves and just sweep it under the rug or ignore it. And I agree with that. The problem I have, and I think the problem I'm going to have with this whole episode, is that I feel like Carl especially has learned just enough in therapy from the one thing that he is admitting to, which is adultery, cheating on his wife with consensual affairs. And he's going to take what he learned about admitting to that and working through that in therapy and use all of the right words, all of the right language, say all of the right things. And it is really going to make people think that he is a different man in a different place and that there is nothing to worry about anymore and that there aren't other concerns that still should be addressed by them. I'm really easily convinced of things. And so whenever they talk, I find myself being like, oh, I actually agree with this, or oh, it isn't so bad. And that is true for that one thing in that one context. But it's all the stuff that they are leaving out and not saying and not addressing that I think is the problem.
When you go through something like we've gone through, a crisis or something that's really hard, you either break down and die and let it define you for the rest of your life, or you get up and you fight and you try to break through and remind yourself that we're all writing our story and nobody else can control the true, real narrative of your life. And we have had a journey of making sure we don't lay down, die, and let a hard chapter define us. So it's a real pleasure and a real honor to be sitting here. A little bit surreal for me. My hope for this is that we can at least show people that there is another side to a tragic story.
Yeah.
Because as it stood before we've done this, we haven't spoken, we haven't talked, we participated in a documentary, which we'll talk about. But I think for us, most of the people know one side of the story, which is, yes, it is true. I got fired from my job. I broke my marriage vows. I broke the trust of a lot of people. I had an amazing position as a pastor and a leader, and I fell on my face. That is true. That's part of the story. And we're here today, still alive, still married, 21 years. Shout out to you. Our family's stronger than ever.
Yep.
And we have more joy and more peace than probably we've ever had. And that's part of the story. So I hope when people...
And what we're not going to talk about is Leona Kimes and her accusations and how Laura slapped her in the face and how people have accused us of spiritual manipulation and how toxic of an environment Hillsong and that evangelical Christian world was. So, and that too.
But I think for us, most of the people know one side of the story, which is, yes, it is true. I got fired from my job. I broke my marriage vows. I broke the trust of a lot of people. I had an amazing position.
A relationship.
Yeah, and I think people don't sometimes understand that talking about this stuff, it is hard. It is triggering. Yeah. We have put to rest a lot of things, but bringing this up, it's another credit to you for being brave enough to talk about this. Because for me, a lot of it is humiliating. Right. A lot of it is embarrassing. A lot of it is, you just want to look at it and shake your head. But we're choosing to go, the least I can do is put our story out there and say, hey, if this helps you avoid the pain and the tears, so thank you for even agreeing to do this. It's a big deal. I know it's been emotional for both of us. And I know it's going to be worth it. So that's what we're going to do on this podcast, especially early on. We're going to talk about our story because everybody else has. And I think it's
so this is going to feel really nitpicky, but even just in the way that they talk about that, Carl is really propping Laura up and himself up in this situation to say like how brave and how amazing, because it's so humiliating for them and it's so difficult for them and it's embarrassing to talk about these things that no one asked you to talk about. But if it can help one person, they're willing to go through that pain and work through it. And oh my gosh, thank you, Laura, so much for being here and for being willing to do this difficult thing, embarrassing, humiliating thing with me that no one asked for, that you don't have to do. It's just like immediately it just sounds like, wow, how brave are we? How amazing are we that we're willing to do this hard thing and talk about ourselves because everyone else has. I just don't think it's necessary. And like, sure, do whatever you want with your own life, but you're not like the bravest person ever to talk about your infidelity and your journey to healing or what you feel like is healing.
It feels good. It feels natural to be able to speak to it. And then we're going to move on and do different things. But as it stands right now, we're going to try to answer as many questions that we've been told by people we love. We asked around, so what do you think would help people the most? What are the questions that people are asking? And some of them were like, and so we're going to do that. We're just going to go question for question and see where we go. But with the hopes that people will be able to look into this thing and go, I can glean from that. I won't do that. And that's our story as we know it. So I'm going to, whatever you want to say, whatever you want to ask, shoot for the stars.
Yeah. So I get a lot of women and men on my DMs or, reaching out to me who have gone through similar situations. And so that's why I wanted to do this, because it's hard to answer a lot of things in that setting, but to be able to share our story and help people in that setting that may be struggling or don't know what to do in whatever situation they find themselves. I'm hoping that this is going to help them with, whatever they're going through.
There's no way it can't.
No.
Have you found, I think this is interesting, we've gotten to see what a marriage breakdown and a church breakdown looks like from a different side.
Sorry, there's no way it can't. There's a way that it could be unhelpful depending on how you discuss this and how you position it and what narrative you follow on whether it's helpful. I'm not saying it won't be helpful for anyone. I don't even really want to knock them that much. I know I just did. But like, if they want to do this and they think it's going to be helpful, fine. Again, my issue is not addressing the other things. And this sounds very Christian and evangelical. The way we did things worked for us, so it must work for you too. And just because you did things a certain way or healed a certain way or moved forward a certain way doesn't mean that that will be helpful for everyone else. They just so clearly have not deconstructed from the systems and the beliefs that have gotten them to this point and that put them in such a toxic situation. They've only dealt with the one problem, infidelity.
And I think I would never have known what I feel like I know now about it, how lonely it is, how hard it is, and we've seen people reach out that have just been through so much stuff and they've just been out there floating around.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that was like a real thing. Yeah.
Can be worse
definitely.
than ours. Ours was just public.
And we had amazing friends that stepped up and helped us, but that's not the case for a lot of people.
Yeah.
We had some support systems with our family. That's not the case with a lot of people. And you just don't know what to do. And so I look forward to that changing. We can be a part of that, and people are in marriage situations where you feel lonely and you feel like you can't get through it. We are evidence, absolute evidence that you can, and that there's hope after a lot of pain.
And you said before, like, we're going to tell our story and then we'll move on. I don't know that we'll ever move on from it. It's kind of, it's a part of our life. And so probably through this podcast, it is going to come up in different ways.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you some questions.
Yes, ma'am.
That I think people want to know, especially because, I was telling you about this, but you kind of 3 years ago, stuff happened. You apologized publicly. And then we disappeared. And so I think a lot of people are like, what's happened? Like, they probably have a lot of things that they think about you and things that they've seen in the media, things that people have talked about that we haven't answered. So I think maybe you talking about, if I ask you the questions and then you
perfect
answer could be fun.
Yeah, perfect. Yes.
Okay. So why do you think we waited so long, or why did you wait so long to talk?
We waited so long to talk because we had a bigger priority, which was to save our family. More accurately, for me to save my own life and then work to try to save our marriage and then work to try to save our family. And very difficult because my instinct is to go to war immediately.
Right.
My instinct is to defend myself, give context, give clarity. And the way all that went down, we had to make a choice right up front. Which way are we going to handle this chapter? And for me and you, I think the best advice that we got was you cannot save face and save your life at the same time. And I remember hearing that going, well, that doesn't work for me because I want to salvage my reputation. I want to tell people what happened. I want to do all this stuff. And I need to get in a place of healing because I am in deep, deep trouble. And I remember we chose healing over reputation protection. It's very difficult, wasn't easy, but the healthier we got, the better it got. It didn't mean the voices ever went away, or you could see things out of the corner of your eye, or hear stories, or see things being spun. But once you make that choice to go, I don't really care. Well, at the end of the day, there's nothing to salvage here. People are going to think what they're going to think. All I care about is trying to save what matters. All I care about is trying to save this family. And I was in trouble. I was in really, really, really deep trouble. And I remember immediately thinking that this is going to be a different road. The night that all that stuff went down, or the day after, at least, we were staying at a friend's house because we had sold our house, and we're
in New York,
and
New Jersey.
Yeah, and staying in a friend's house in Brooklyn, and they graciously let us use their apartment. And when all this stuff went down, we were obviously just shell-shocked, reeling, horrible. It makes me feel weird to even talk about it. But then I got a call from the person who lives there, and he said, basically, I want, with somebody that worked for him. He said, you guys have to leave because the owner of this place does not want to be associated with you. And I said, oh, okay, like where does he want us to go? He's like, doesn't care. He wants you out within a couple of hours. And all of our stuff's here. Our kids are here. There's, some photographers and reporters around.
I do think that's kind of wild. I mean, I have plenty of issues with this man and all of that went down, but I also can't imagine kicking children out of their shelter within 2 hours. That seems wild.
Taking photos, and all this stuff is flying around, and our kids are like, what's going on? I remember we had to take everything we have in this apartment, put it on the street in Brooklyn, and then we got a U-Haul and a U-Haul van, and we're just throwing stuff in there, and our kids still don't really know what's going on. And we're just, I'm in like a weird comatose trance mode of just don't even know where I am. You're trying to survive. Yeah. And me and Roman were in the U-Haul, and we just started driving. You were in the van with the girls. We started driving. I remember getting on the highway, pulling out of, Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And I just remember thinking, like, what are we doing? Where are we going to go? And Roman's next to me. He's my little guy still. He's, Dad, what are we doing? Why don't we have anywhere to go? And I couldn't get a hold of anybody at that point. So I realized a lot of people were kind of going to handle this however way they're going to handle it. And we finally found our friend, Kim Clark, who said, come and stay with us in Connecticut. And our first couple nights, we really felt like, man, the whole world has ended. We have been.
Well, it was COVID as well.
It's COVID.
So weird.
We have no idea which way is up right now, and we're in trouble. And that was one of those nights I'll never forget. I'll never forget sitting in that car, looking at my boy with all our belongings and 2 U-Hauls, going like, how did I get here? Like, is this real life? And that's why we made the decisions that we made, to just work on us, work on our family. For me, being a control guy.
That is a really sad and scary story, and makes me have a lot of empathy for them. I, again, can't imagine punishing children for things that their parent has done because you don't want to be associated with them. And it's nice that for the kids' sake, there was someone that would take them in. But that story is doing, I think, exactly what Carl and Laura want it to do for us, is making them have a lot of sympathy for them when he put his family in that situation. And that was people not wanting to associate with him was no one's fault but his own, for being in that environment and for doing what he did. I also think it's really interesting that that's the question they started with, and that they even framed that question in that way. Like, why have you taken so long to say anything or speak up or come back to the public eye? I don't think they've been gone for long enough, to be honest with you. Healing from something like this takes years and years and decades and your whole life, like what they said. I personally think that it would all be much easier for them if they stayed out of the public eye, if they didn't do a podcast, if they didn't do things like that. It is much easier to work through these things and deconstruct and really understand what you believe and why you believe it when you're not also speaking to the public about these things. So I think 4 years is not that long. I can't imagine why they would speak before that. And I just think is that like a really pressing question that a lot of like Christians have, or people in their spaces? Because take time to heal, stay out of the public eye. Why would you not?
Letting it go was not easy. But I got some advice that I still tell people to this day. I still apply it to my own life. By the way, we're not going to be the podcast of the people that have arrived and know everything. We're the people that are on a journey of healing. But he said, Carl, you got to let the.
I don't know that they really believe that. I know they think that's the right thing to say, but I think they still have a mindset of like, I don't know. I will see. Only time will tell.
The rainfall. Because I remember calling my friend going, this isn't fair. Like at some point we got to step up, and at some point we got to say something. At some point we have to share our side. He said, it doesn't matter right now. You got to let all the rain fall. And if the rain falls and it hits the ground, and eventually if it stays long enough, it will produce new life, new growth. That rain in this crisis, it's part of the process, and you have to let it fall.
Which is hard. That was hard for you because your natural, your personality is to fight. It's to protect. It's to justify. It's to do all of that. So this was really a hard thing for you to do. I was okay because I'm like, I just wanted to hide. So you also said you were in trouble. You were in big, deep trouble. Can you explain that a little bit more? Because for some people, they're probably like, what is that?
When I say in trouble, I think I was at the end of a spiral, a cycle of decisions that I had been making, and I felt like I wanted to take my own life. And I told you that, didn't know what to do about it, but I knew it was serious. And I think there's like two parts of me. One part of me was just like, I just want to go. I just want to leave. I don't want to be here. I'm so embarrassed. I'm humiliated. My family is in this way because of me. And I was in a really, really bad way. I felt like it was, I didn't know what the next hour was going to hold. And so for me, to be at that level of fear was really dangerous. And I think by the grace of God, we had some people step in and help us and point to a plan. And I remember right early on just saying, here, I'm going to put my life in the care of some men that have not chosen to leave. They're going to stay. And I'm going to try to figure out what to do. And we're going to go bit by bit. And it was the choice we made to be quiet all this time, so worth it because of where I feel like we sit today. And you cannot heal and fight at the same time. So I've seen now from this view, I've seen other people do it their way, where people are always fighting. And I think to myself, how many Instagram posts can you put up? How many subtweets can you subtweet? How many people can you attack with your side of the story? And I was like, I get it. I relate to it.
Yeah.
But how can you heal? How do you heal if you're always moving, if you're always fighting, if you're always swinging? How in the world can you ever figure out what's wrong with you?
Right.
And I'm so glad. I'm grateful. I didn't get it at the time. I hated it at the time. It was so hard. Now I look back, and if I would have spent any time defending myself or trying to figure out some way to salvage our image, there's no way I would have been able to get help because I would have focused on that.
We've been really quiet for the most part. We did do the Hulu documentary. That's all we did. Do you regret doing that? Would you have changed it?
All we did was an entire documentary on Hulu where we got to sit down and share our version of events with everything that we wanted to say. That's all we did. I don't know. Am I being annoying?
In terms of like feeling like we were maybe a bit too soon or like shouldn't have said it. I don't know. What do you think?
We had so many opportunities to do interviews. And I remember thinking after we got through that first season, I remember thinking, I don't know when we're ever going to be able to speak on this. The right time will come. And we were approached about the documentary. I don't know if I would do it again. I think my motive was to feel understood.
Yeah.
That's, if I'm honest, that's why we did it.
Yeah.
And that's never a good motive. Like my overriding thing, I said other things. I was like, we can do it for this. We want to do it for that. But if I really, really search my own soul, we did that so people would understand. What I realized afterwards is that it's not going to work. It doesn't matter. There are people who are not, they don't want to understand. And there's people who do want to understand. We can't change their minds. I can't change anybody's minds. So I look back, I wouldn't change. I wouldn't regret it because I didn't know then. I thought this is going to be an objective documentary, which isn't ever going to happen. I think that the producers tried to be as honest as they could with it, but we didn't control it.
We didn't know what they were putting it. We didn't know who they were talking to or what any of it was about. We
Yeah.
just knew that our story was going to be like a
Yeah.
overarching
Yeah. And
situation.
it was going to be left alone because we
Yeah.
had said we don't want our story to be attached to a narrative about how somebody else is bad or whatever.
Yeah.
And you know what? People made it what they wanted to make it. But I learned
I felt like their Hillsong documentary was entirely about them and the narrative that they wanted to tell and put them in a really good light. That's so interesting. I wonder how they see it or why they see it differently.
in that moment of watching people talk about us. Some stuff was true. A lot of it's not true, which we could talk about. But I know for myself, the thing that I realized is if you don't want for people to lie about you, don't put yourself in a position to be lied about.
Right.
And I started pointing to myself. I'm going, you know what? Yeah, the lies are hard because what I did do was bad enough to just talk about that. But it's the stuff that, was thrown on in the middle of that. And
What stuff was thrown on in the middle of that? Because we know you admitted to cheating in consensual extramarital relationships. What are you saying are lies? What are you saying was thrown onto that? Why are you not even saying what it is? That's bothering me a bit.
I went from being mad and bitter to going, it's my fault. Like, it's my fault. I put us in the middle of this road for people to lie about us. So rather than be even mad at the liars, it was a great moment for me to go, you know what? I'm just never in my life going to give other people the control that I gave them, because when you are in a situation that's dishonest, people don't know what to believe. So I remember that day kind of changed me when we talked about it. I'm just never going to be here again. People are going to talk, and they did. But moving forward, I will never put myself in the position that I put myself in. I'll never put you and our kids in a position where they can be vulnerable. So yeah, that's why we waited. That's why we waited so long. Glad we did.
And you just were saying it's your fault that you put us in that
Yep.
position. Who is at fault?
Mm.
Who is at fault in this whole situation? Because there was things thrown around in that space as well.
Yeah. I'm at fault. I'm at fault. My decisions, my choices, that's my.
I wonder what she means by there were things thrown around about that as well. What things? I know that a huge narrative from the evangelical community and things that I've said is that Laura Lentz is not admitting fault to things and owning up to things. And I specifically felt like the documentary sounded like the Lentzes were blaming Hillsong for a lot of the problems and Brian Houston specifically for a lot of the problems instead of taking ownership of what happened. I don't mean ownership of cheating. That is the only thing he is admitting fault to. Notice how they're not even saying anything else. No one cares about that. People are upset that he's not admitting fault to the spiritual abuse and manipulation and toxic environment of Hillsong, and completely ignoring the Leona Kimes allegations.
Responsibility, and I take responsibility for it. I have wanted people to know when I get a chance to talk to them that I'm deeply sorry for what happened, and it's nobody else's responsibility. It's mine. We always have choice. We always have our own agency to do what we feel like we have to do. And I mismanaged my personal life. I hid things that I should not have hid. I lied about things I shouldn't have lied about. I was confused about who I was at times, didn't get any help for it. And the result was a whole lot of pain for a whole lot of people, which I will remain deeply sorry for the rest of my life. I don't live in the shame of it, but I'll never forget the impact that it had on people. And it's nobody else's fault. It's my fault. And I feel like when you're in a situation where you have made mistakes, you have two options. You could point out the window and try to find other people that are more guilty, as guilty, and you feel that need to deflect blame, or you look in the mirror. And I feel like we've done the best job we can. I know I have worked really hard at staying in the mirror. What did I do? What's my responsibility? What's my role in this? What part in this story did I play? And I am so heavy throughout it that I don't have a lot of time anymore to worry about other people's role in the story. But what happened to our marriage and what happened to my platform, it was my fault and my responsibility, nobody else's. And that's just the truth. That's just the way that I see it. It's the way that I accept it. It's the way that I relate to it. And my job now is to make living amends. So as I've explained to you, when you wrong people and you hurt people and you offend people and you break the trust of people, you if you're truly about owning what you did, you try to make amends. And I've done that where I can privately with the people that I feel like it's been appropriate. But when you're a public figure person and you've hurt people on a bigger scale, your whole life has to be a living amends.
Yeah.
And that's what I plan on doing. I can't, go up to every single person that was a part of our beautiful church and say, I'm sorry to you. I can't do it. It's not possible. But I can live a life of integrity and honesty that gives people reason to believe and gives people reason to have hope. And I cannot change people. I can't change their minds. Big revelation for me in this chapter. What I can do is live a life of integrity and honesty. And nobody cares about what my words are when it comes to that. I don't care. You don't care what my words are. But if you're truly repentant and you're sorry about something, your words need to be said, but it'll change the way you think. And when you change the way you think, it changes the way you act. That's true repentance. So I feel like we've got a couple of years now of fruit of what we've been trying to do. But that's my goal. If people want to believe, if people want to follow, if people want to listen, that's their right. I can't change them. But what I can do is continue to recover, be who I feel like I'm called to be your husband, be a dad, and leave my life on display like it's always been. Say, if you watch the bad parts of it, well, the story's still continuing.
Right.
This is the story. Take it or leave it. This is who we are. And that's my goal, just to live a life of living amends. I really want to be able to say this to you in public because you were, your reputation was damaged in public. You had nothing to do with my hidden sin and hidden habits and hidden addictions. You did not know what was going on with me. And I know there's been some confusing reports where people can try to piece something together and say, Laura, was she complicit? Did she know? And that's just not true. It's not our story. You didn't know anything about what I was doing because I became really proficient at making my life work despite a lot of pain. And there were times where you asked me questions to my face and I didn't give you honest answers. There were other times where I even tried to make your reality confused. And you're just a beautiful human being. And your character has never, ever been in question. There's never been a complaint about you. You are the most lovable person and the most loved person that I've ever known. You were the backbone of our church, the leader to so many people, and you did not deserve what I gave you, which is a scandal that's humiliating. You deserve better. And you've had to stand strong and watch people even start to try to bring you into stories that are so malicious and so evil. Again, that's on me. It's not even on the liars. But I'm so sorry that it happened. I've apologized to you to the point you've told me to stop apologizing. But it's freeing. It feels really good for me to be able to say you had nothing to do with what I was doing. You didn't find out and then cover it up and try to keep it going. Like, you've never cared about that. You never cared about our role like that. You would never stand for that. And it just got to the point where I think God had enough. And I'm grateful for that. I look back now at that situation. I don't even relate to it as this horrible tragedy. I relate to it now as a moment in our story that I got saved again, that I got a chance to be free again,
Again, this is putting it back on what Carl got out of it. I'm curious to know who these liars are and what they're saying. And again, what they're referring to, because it's hard to agree with them or disagree with them when they're being so vague about what they're talking about. I personally have issues with Laura and think that she is complicit in certain things. I don't necessarily think she knew about it and hid it. I think Carl and Laura are wrapped up in a toxic cult-like culture that leads to believing certain things and acting in a certain way that is not super healthy. I think she was a victim in her marriage with Carl and what he was doing to her and how he was gaslighting her. And I wonder if they're referring to Leona Kimes specifically with their nanny in that situation, because I do think in certain situations with that, she knew certain things and after the fact and like had seen certain lines being crossed and blamed Leona for that. She admitted to catching them in a compromised position and slapping Leona Kimes in the face. She admitted to wanting the nanny out of there and all of that. Who, by the way, I don't know if you guys know, I might do a separate video on this, but Leona Kimes was the wife of another Hillsong pastor, like Hillsong Boston or something like that. And instead of being the pastor's wife at their Hillsong location, she was nannying for Carl and Laura Lentz. And even after she had kids, she was nannying for them, I think. I actually don't know that for a fact, but I know that while she should have been like the pastor's wife at another Hillsong church, she was Carl and Laura's nanny. And I know that Carl and Laura didn't treat her very well at times. And again, I'm not saying that Laura is like a terrible person or covered up for Carl or anything like that, but Laura Lentz is also not a saint. She also did some things that were not right. And was she in a difficult position? Yeah, absolutely. Do I think she was in a cult-like, almost brainwashed mindset? Yeah, sure. But we're still responsible for those things that we do in that situation, and we're still responsible for like owning up to them. So I'm just speculating, but I wish they would stop letting us speculate and be more clear about what they're talking about.
I got a chance to be honest again, and I don't. Not everybody gets a second chance.
Yeah.
I've taken mine, and I'm living in it, and I'm going to keep living in it, and that's my story. That's my encouragement for anybody going through it. Like, how do you get a second chance? Choose it, and use it. And didn't even mean for that to rhyme, but it did. And I think one thing that I read when it comes to fault that's interesting to me is every headline typically would say disgraced pastor, or pastor falls from grace, falls from grace, falls from grace, disgraced pastor. What's funny about that is God bless those people. They don't understand grace, because you can't fall from grace. You fall into grace. So it didn't even make any sense to me. And I'm not mad at the tabloids who write, because they're, oh, disgraced pastor, disgraced. You don't understand what grace is. It's the opposite of grace. Grace is mercy and favor and forgiveness that you do not deserve, but God gives it to you anyway. So if anything, I fell into grace. And if people could stop writing headlines like that, I would appreciate it, because it's inaccurate. Disgraced pastor. I'm not a disgraced former pastor. I am a human being that made huge mistakes. Mine were public. Everybody got to see them. And now I'm a human being that's trying to rectify.
You are a disgraced former pastor, though, and you are a human being, and you did make really big mistakes, and you were a public figure. But I think that it's interesting the way they're talking about this, because it sounds to me like they're saying, we're human just like you. We just did this publicly and you didn't. They're negating the position of power he was in at the time, and how that position of power and proximity to celebrities and being held up in a cult-like institution played a role in this and allowed for this, and why it's a much bigger deal in that case. It's not just about it being public. It's about you lying so heavily beyond just cheating. This is not just a man that cheated on his wife. That's its whole own thing. And I think that's what they're trying to unpack and talk about. But doing it as a pastor that's counseling people for doing that thing and telling them not to do it, and portraying yourself a certain way while you're doing these other things, and spiritually manipulating and abusing that position of power to get things that you want, that's the problem. And I don't know why it's so easy for them to overlook that, except for the fact that they haven't deconstructed or tried to understand those power dynamics, because I do believe that Carl Lentz is trying for his marriage and his family. I don't believe that he's trying for community and to understand the evangelical world that he was raised in and deconstructing how that played a role in this. And that's the issue most people are having.
My life and make wrongs right and to live completely differently. But disgraced, I am not. I'm more filled with grace than I've ever been. Did I fall from grace? Absolutely not. I fell into it, and I'm really grateful for that. And if people feel disgraced, I understand it. What you could say what I did was disgraceful, maybe at times, sure. But I'm not disgraced because we're forgiven, and I have been able to feel God's grace more than ever. I understand the thought, but I just wanted to get it out there. That doesn't fit me. You can keep writing that headline if you want, but that's not me. I don't identify as the disgraced former pastor. No, sir. No, ma'am. Whoever's writing that. If you were to ask me what's the order of things that I've struggled with the most, it's the pain that you and our kids have had to carry and that you and our kids have had to walk through. You don't think of that when you're making stupid decisions behind closed doors. You just don't. You can't ever imagine or feel the weight of it.
No
and
shit.
out of everything that's happened, watching you shoulder the blame and walk in that consequence with me as your husband, I don't know where you get that strength from. I don't know where you get that courage from. I'm glad you have it. But our children, to be able to walk through that storm and to be able to stand strong and tall today, if you wanted to give me a recipe for kids that would walk away from God and write off everything to do with our faith, it would be the recipe that was given to our children.
Kids, yeah.
And to watch those little people be their own people, to watch them continue to pursue a relationship with God, to not be bitter. They got some stuff to say, and they're going to say it because they're human and they're amazing. But the fact that they have been who, we've seen them become, it's just a real blessing. I don't take it for granted. Like every time I see them, I'm like the parent now that goes overboard on the easy stuff because I'm like, I put you in a tough spot. What can I get you? Can I buy you a car? I'm that guy. I got to guard myself against being that guy. Just out of constant guilt check. I got to check my guilt every time I have to discipline my children. But that was the hardest part. And because it was the hardest part, it's the part that I'm believing for the most fruit and grace on the other side of it.
Yeah.
Christians love to say, I went through this hard thing, but I didn't leave Christianity. I didn't leave God. And I think it's perfectly valid for that to be your reality. If you go through hard things and stay Christian, that's totally fine. And it's perfectly valid to leave and reevaluate and deconstruct and maybe not believe in God for a time or forever, or decide who you are within that. That is also valid and safe and a reality that you can choose. That's not better or worse than staying in your belief system. And in fact, I think it's better than staying in your toxic belief system that doesn't get to the root of the real problems.
I think we're seeing that.
We're seeing that in our family.
Which, I mean, you don't see it when you're in it. You're like, oh, we are so effed. Like, my kids are a mess.
Yeah.
And that was hard as a mum to watch because you're like, you mother, like you did this to our kids and to me. And so that was hard because I can't protect them from that. And I couldn't because it was so public. But they seeing where they are today and how strong they are and how honest they are and how much grace they have for other people and empathy for other families and their friends and things that they've had to face. I'm super grateful that we could take this situation and, they've gotten the best out of it.
Yeah.
It's been hard, but they've gotten the best.
I remember telling Charlie about what happened, and she said, thanks for telling me, Dad. I don't forgive you, and I don't know. Understandably, she's like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. So I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. It's not owed.
She was 14 at the time.
It's not owed. It's not expected. But she looked at me and said, I don't know if I can ever forgive you. And the day she did was, one of my favorite days. And to give more context on Charlie's surrounding situation, she had a mental health breakdown that was so serious that we had to admit her into a hospital.
She went to a teens
mental health institution, and it was scary.
She was there for 8 weeks.
We almost lost
8
her.
weeks?
We almost lost her. And so while all this is going on, that's in the background. And it was really hard. And we found out about everything that happened. And we called the hospital and said, hey, something's going to come out. And I want to tell my daughter, because not allowed to have contact with them except for twice a week. And I need to be able to tell my daughter now, because if someone in that hospital finds out, I don't want them to hear. I don't want her to hear from them. And so I remember this call with the therapist is on Zoom. Charlie's there, and I had to look across the screen and say, Charlie, there's some really, really bad news that's about to come out. And told her what I did and what had happened. And that's when she looked at me and she just was quiet. Remember, she was quiet. Mm-hmm. She's quiet and just said, thanks for telling me, Dad. I don't forgive you, though. Yeah. I don't forgive you. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you.
Yeah.
I said, I get that.
And then we're like, can she stay a few more weeks?
Yeah. It's actually, we look back on it, was really, really fortunate.
Yeah.
She was able to process that in a hospital with a therapist. Ava, who has a lot of your spirit, forgave me right away, hugged me and said, there's going to be a lot that comes from this, but Dad, I forgive you. And Roman, I don't know if he's ever vocalized yet that he has forgiven me. So this is a work in progress. I mean, we're tighter than we've ever been, but he's unable to talk about this. As we record this pod, he is our child that has processed it the most internal. And it's starting to come out, and I'm looking forward to that, being fruitful and healthy. But man, it's hard when I look back on it, but I'm so grateful, for it and for what our kids have. People forget that the first chapter of their lives, they were in public, part of a church revival in New York City. Wild, amazing. But they've already sacrificed. They've already, been through so much, and then have that happen. Just shout out to our amazing kids. You've done something right as a mom. Maybe I've done some things right as a dad too over the years, but thank God that our kids have made it through. And a lot of people have asked about our children. I'm thankful for that. I appreciate the people who have continued to pray and love our kids. And they are amazing people. They're fierce. And it's true. You can't underestimate how much suffering can produce growth. And we don't like to suffer, and we don't like to go through pain, but watching them suffer. Remember, a therapist told us together, and we did a session about our kids. She said, don't teach your kids how to avoid it. Teach them how to suffer well. And I'm like, that doesn't sound right. Teach my kids how to suffer well. She said, yeah, because it's going to prepare them for life. Mm-hmm. You cannot avoid suffering. And I know you hate the scenario you put on your kids, but teach them how to suffer through it. What does that look like? And we can talk about that down the road. How do you suffer well? But they learn that, and they're better for it. And I just love our kids. I'm super proud of them.
Me too.
Yeah.
They're amazing. Super strong.
People say, what's the darkest day? I'm like, which one?
Yeah.
Got a couple. I got a museum of dark days, but stuff like that, if you don't give up in the middle of it, that was the stuff that made me want to quit. When I look back, I mean, I'm a fighter. I can get through a lot, but I just never planned on my kids going through that much pain that I caused. Yeah. But they are amazing today. And we are so close where it's annoying. Can't even shake them.
I mean, yeah, they're like so clingy now because we had so many years together.
Yeah.
Of just the five of us.
Just us. Yeah.
And we would never have had that if we were still doing what we were doing in New York. Like, we wouldn't have had this time. And I wouldn't change that for anything.
No, I wouldn't either. Like, I don't like, this road has been hard.
Been the worst, but it's
been hard. But if I look at it now and I look at our relationship and where our kids are at, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I guess God is faithful, and who they are becoming is just a real amazing credit to them. Proud of them. Proud of you. Holding it together during that time. I was just unavailable, completely unable to do anything. On top of being the reason for all this, I could barely keep there were days where I didn't even know where I was, didn't know what I was doing. I felt like I was in a constant state of brain fog, and I later found out what all that was, but it was bad. But you did the role of both of us. And that's why I think you're the bravest person I know. And with fault, there's things that have to be said when there's an opportunity to say it. And it's my fault that a lot of people that we love, our church especially, were put in a position where they had to defend or they had to disassociate. I get that. And our church was always controversial. I've always been a bit of a lightning rod with some of the stances we've taken. So I think our church became accustomed to like, no, yeah, our church might look like this, but it's this, and defend. And then people stood on it. And then this comes out, and I just cannot imagine what that would have felt like. And I'm so sorry about that. I'm sad about it, but it's my fault. And I accept responsibility and to the people that stood tall and defended us and were a part of all that we built. I cannot wait for a brighter day. It just broke my heart to know that people who have been standing up for me my whole life. I gave ammunition to everybody who wanted to say something about big church, about pastors like me. I gift wrapped it. And I recognize that even the pastors that I love, my who used to be my peers, I recognize I made their job harder. And anytime one pastor falls, it has a ripple effect, especially when it comes to other ministers. And I have apologized to the men that I know when I can, and to those that I might not meet. That's the truth. It's my heart. I'm so sorry that I've dedicated my life to be a light in the church. And there was a chapter there where I made it harder for people to do their job. I'm aware of that, and grateful that there's so many awesome pastors out there. The real story that's never written is that there are so many faithful pastors. There are so many men and women that serve faithfully without scandal.
Right.
It's just, situations like ours get a lot of press and a lot of airtime. So, but yeah.
So that's really interesting, because Carl Lentz is certainly not the only pastor to have fallen from grace. And as I suspected, there is no acknowledgement or understanding of the systemic issues in evangelical churches, in megachurches, especially in celebrity megachurches. There's no acknowledgement of those deeper issues going on. It's just Carl Lentz was struggling and he's making it hard for other pastors. And he just had this one thing that he had to deal with, and it was really hard and blah, blah, blah. But everyone else is fine. And I do think that there are a lot of pastors out there that are good people, that are trying to do the right thing, that don't have skeletons in the closet or some big scandal. However, when it comes to celebrity megachurches, famous megachurches, they are dropping like flies every other month, it seems. There are systemic issues, and there are so many of them that do have skeletons in their closet, that are using manipulative tactics and spiritual abuse against their congregants, that are using their positions of power to harm people. There are so many that are doing that. So just Carl Lentz falling from grace is not adding fuel to the fire. In fact, Carl might not like to know this, but if he never existed, didn't exist, doesn't exist, just take his story out of this whole thing, those issues are still there and are still real and still do exist. That's not a unique to him problem. And usually the pastors that are good people, that are trying their best, that are doing well, that are helping their communities and leading well, are small, and you don't know their names, and they are in their communities and nobody knows about them. And I get that, Carl Lentz is more famous and his issues get more coverage, but so do many other pastors. Like, Gateway Church is going through it right now. The SBC has exposed so many churches with pastors that have been SAing women and children for years and just getting moved around, and none of it's getting reported. Like, there is so much wrong with big church and mega churches and celebrity mega churches. Carl Lentz himself doesn't even scratch the surface. It's not even the beginning of it. But he did participate in it. He did perpetuate it. He did use his position of power to be able to do these things that, his trauma and everything did lead to, I'm sure. There's just so much more here that they could unpack and that they could understand, and they don't. They ignore it and they sweep it under the rug, and it's wild.
Talked about a few things, but in our story, but what actually is the story? Like, what happened
for those?
Because some people know, most people don't.
Yeah. Most people don't. And for those that do.
Most people don't know? Is that a joke? There are 2 documentaries. What do you mean?
they probably don't know
They don't know
what really
either.
happened, because
Right.
it was hard to watch people accept one side of a story. But what happened, for those who don't know, like I alluded to earlier, I had some private addictions and problems and habits that we'll get into in depth, on this podcast, that caused me to make huge mistakes, personal mistakes. I was unfaithful to you, and I covered it up. And as we know, covering up things does nothing but make the thing worse. And that began to build, and cycles in my life began to continue. And it was found out that I was unfaithful in my marriage, and I was fired publicly. And it was one of the catalyst things that started an entire bigger picture, a bigger conversation about Hillsong Church. And I was a part of that. So that's what happened. I had a really, really phenomenal role, loved it. And I made mistakes in private that cost me and everybody in public. And so that's what happened. I don't know what people have heard or what people might have assumed or thought, but that's as unspectacular as it was. I made bad decisions, and I lied. I covered it up, and grateful that I can live a different kind of life now. But that's the truth. That's what happened.
Does anyone feel like that was any more clear than what he's been saying this whole podcast? It's still extremely vague. Not that he has to give details, but if you cue it up like you're going to give some details and then don't give details, again, it's hard to argue with that. Being vague is a bit of a manipulation tactic because you have nothing to like latch onto. There's nothing to critique or like understand better. There is so much left out of that. The way that he was like, I don't know what you've heard. Well, address some of those things. Address some of the things that you think are false. Why wouldn't you do that? Like, I just can't
feel like, do you think people can live with lies or covering up things? Because I know there's a lot of other people that have done the same thing and cover it up.
Yeah.
That's going to come out.
Definitely will come out. I think the grace and compassion that we have towards the people that we know that are dealing with the same thing, I'm sad because nobody looked at my situation and was like, that looks incredible.
Right. Because of how it was handled.
People looked at our situation like, oh my gosh, if it happened to that guy like that, what's going to happen to me? So it's not like what our situation brought like a huge wave of honesty in the church. I don't believe that happened. I know it didn't happen from my vantage point. I know a lot of guys were like, I'm going to go deeper in hiding, and I'm going to make sure that my wife is cool with this, and we're just going to gut this out in private because I do not want to lose my job. Right. I don't want to lose my reputation. I don't want to lose this. So I'm definitely going to be able to point at this guy and, have judgments about it. But the stuff that I'm going through, so that's a real part of this. And I think that.
So is he saying that he personally knows a lot of other pastors that are cheating on their wives? And what they did when this came out is just tell their wives about it and look for acceptance and not actually deal with it because they don't want to get fired. And he specifically knows who they are. And you don't think this is a systemic issue? You don't think there's a problem if a bunch of pastors of evangelical celebrity megachurches are all cheating on their wives? You don't think they're also maybe spiritually manipulating in toxic environments? Like, you don't think any... What?
That happened, and it is happening. I hope we can bring a little bit of light to that and help people, because it's going to come out. If you build anything on a lie, it's going to fall eventually. And my story is that we did a lot of great things. There's a lot of good things happening, but there was a lie in the foundation, in the fabric of who I was as a person, not even an incident. There was a lie about who I was. And it's painful. The consequences are painful.
One thing I don't understand, how can you stand up? How can you stand there and preach on a stage every week, knowing that you're holding so many secrets, so many, sins, lies, all of that? Like, how do you do that?
Good for you, Laura, for asking that question. That's the first real and juicy question I feel like you guys have addressed this whole time, because I'm curious too. I also don't understand and can't fathom.
Very difficult question. And I understand it. The way I can articulate living a life where you have that kind of secrecy, it is torture for the person living, me, and it's torture for the people that are not in the know. I don't care who you are, what you've done. Nobody's created to live with lies. If anything, we tell a lie and we sit on it and we learn to live with it. It's like adapting to dysfunction. That's what it's like to live with a lie. And there's no burying a lie. We think that's what's happening. But I look at when I thought I was burying a lie and I was really digging my own grave. And that's a hard reality to face. But now, I know the power of honesty in a totally different way. And that's been a really powerful part of our healing and our journey, is being so honest where it's scary, but I don't know any other way. You told me something, if I have permission to share it telepathically, can I have permission?
Sure.
Well, we were going through our checks like we do, and our marriage checks includes me asking you, how can I make you feel safer? How can I make you feel comforted? And just a regular part of our vernacular. And the other day you told me, you said, I don't know. Let me think about it. You said, I don't remember what it was like to not trust you. And I tried to play it cool. I think I went outside and cried and told a bunch of my friends that are with me, hey, Laura said this. But man, the dichotomy, to be at a place where I broke every amount of trust you had in me. And for a couple years later, for you to look at me and go, I got to dig for a reason. I don't remember what it's like to not trust you. It is an encouragement for people everywhere, because if you're going through something, it can just feel like there's no end in sight. And ours was like that. There were some very hard
100%.
seasons of you just not believing me, and you didn't have to. And it's still not a thing where I have earned the right to like live.
He's yapping a lot. Interesting answer to that question. Again, it was like, I feel like it was very clear there, the vibe I'm getting, that he's answering with what he knows he's supposed to say, and not necessarily with like what I would expect someone in that position who's being honest to say. It's just interesting that he said it was torture for me and it was torture for everyone involved, and you're not supposed to live in a lie. I would expect to hear something like, and maybe this is just me not knowing, maybe this is just me having never been in this position, being naive, whatever, but I would imagine that he would say something like, well, I had to get on that stage and preach these things and continue the lie. And I had to do everything I could in my power for this lie to not be found out. Or I was so hurt and broken already that I needed that validation, and I enjoyed the power trip, and I enjoyed that. Like, I just feel like there's a lot he could have said that would be really specific, if that's the desire in this podcast, to be really specific in these ways, but what he said was, oh, it's just torture. It just was really hard for me. Which I feel like is like a healed version of what you would say. Like, maybe that's something you realized in therapy. Like, oh, it actually was really hard for me, and I was torturing myself in this moment, and I didn't realize it. But at the time, you probably would have felt justified in what you were doing. And so I think that is a more appropriate or honest way to answer that. And it might be hard to think back to that, and that's fine. But I just don't know that he's like really understanding some of the deeper things behind this, or not wanting to share, which is fine too. Don't start a podcast.
Live a certain way. The way our marriage number 2 has worked is every day I got to show up for you.
That's what I was going to say. For me to say,
yeah,
I can't remember not trusting you. That's a lot of work on your end, and it's a lot of, you show up every day doing the work, and I don't take that lightly either. So that's a big deal, and I know a lot of men don't choose to do that.
Well, that leads me to this. Why did you stay married to me? I think that I've watched you have to weather that storm we've obviously hopped on and off social media, and the amount of people that have ridiculed you for staying with me, cursed you out for staying with me, anonymous text messages, once a cheater, always a cheater, you're brainwashed, you're this, why would you stay with that man? And to watch you eat that, stomach it, stand on it, and give me an opportunity. Why did you do that? Because you had biblical grounds to leave me in every way, but you didn't. Why?
I mean, my journey isn't for everyone. I know that. So I did have every reason to leave. Absolutely.
You want to emphasize that again, because you've already said it. I'm kidding. But that. No laughing, no fun.
Yeah. I stayed with you because I saw you doing the work. But firstly, backing all the way back, I remember the first time we sat on the phone, I think it was like the next day or that first week of, everything. We're on the phone with a therapist and she was asking you questions about your childhood and some of the things that you had gone through and the trauma and the abuse. And I saw you break down like I'd never seen you break down, or anyone for that matter, but your physical reaction to what you were trying to explain, what had happened to you. And I saw that, and it wasn't an excuse for me. It wasn't like oh, poor thing. It just gave me context as to what torment you were going through in your own mind. And so that was one of the reasons I chose to stay, was seeing that and what that did to you, for the sake of my kids and for the sake of just, I don't know what it was, but I knew that I needed to stay to heal, firstly, because I'd seen a lot of women go through this. Yeah. And I was the person who would always say, I would never stay. And I know so many people say that even in this situation, look at us and go, oh, she's crazy. I would never stay. I was one of those people. Like I would have been like, get out of here. Like my husband ever did that, I'm out. But when you're in it, it's definitely a different thing. And we had older kids. Yeah. We had older kids, but for me, I didn't want to be one of those women that had all this pent up like brokenness and hurt and things that I'd never, bitterness, and I just chose very early on in this situation to be like, I don't want to live with a broken, bitter heart. And so I did the work myself.
Well, can I interject?
Yeah.
I like that she prefaced that with, this was my journey, and I know not everyone will agree with me and has to walk this way. That's the first time in all of this that I've heard either one of the Lentzes say, this is what I did. This isn't necessarily what anyone else has to do. And it's important to note that Laura felt like she did have the option to leave. That, Carl was like, you had grounds to leave, blah, blah, blah. Some women in these evangelical mega churches, John MacArthur's church, comes to mind. I know that's a totally different thing. It's Calvinist, it's Reformed Calvinist, whatever. These big celebrity pastor churches, some of them are even more fundamentalist, and women don't feel like they have grounds to leave when their husband is unfaithful. They don't feel like they have an option. I think it's really important here that Laura felt like she had an option and felt like this was her choice. And she didn't entirely say this, but it just feels like the option to leave still is a valid choice. I think that's important.
When you said we chose to heal together, what our verbiage is different. So by together,
yes,
at the same time, but we were so not together because we were told, this isn't going to work as a couple. In fact, the place that I went to get help said, if you're here to save your marriage, go somewhere else.
Right.
We're here to save your life.
Yeah.
And if you save your life, maybe your marriage will make it. But any man who comes to a place to get help just for his marriage, it doesn't work.
Well, I think even in our situation, and you've said it before, like I didn't do anything in this. You brought this. I still had to do my work.
Yeah.
I still had to do my own work and my own healing and look at myself. And so I think a lot of people, especially in the Christian space, they'll do couples counseling. They'll do all the couples things together. And the wife will definitely point the finger and it's all him, which can work in some settings. But for us, I was like, we needed to do our own. You needed to do your journey of healing and work. I need to do my journey of healing and work. And so that's how we got to where we are today, even. Like, I think we've maybe done 3 couples sessions
we
in
found
3 years.
For us, it's been more effective to do something different.
People, every journey is different, but that's how
This is the first thing that they've said that I'm like, yeah, good. Like, yeah, that is the most healthy way to do it. I agree with that. And I'm glad that's what worked for you. And again, that you preface it with, this might not be everyone's journey, but it was better for us this way. And I think a lot of people don't do it that way. And it is important to feel like you have autonomy over yourself and your own healing and your own journey. And you can do that without the pressure and the need to stay together. That's incredible.
we've done it.
I think there are things I wanted to jump in and say over these past 3 years, because people just assume, but you gave me really clear ultimatums about what would happen if this were to continue. There were checkpoints. There were people that were involved heavily, so you didn't have to carry all of it. It wasn't your job to make sure I'm doing the right thing. I think a lot of people fall into that trap. It was your job to say what you said, and it was hard. Maybe people don't know, the first time you said you forgave me was last year.
Right.
I think that's maybe someone might have imagined you just saying you forgive me. It wasn't like that. You were, I think what I felt like to me, you were giving me an opportunity to see what I was going to do with this information that I found.
You had broken every piece of trust.
Yeah.
The betrayal part of infidelity it's so beyond what you can I can't even explain the feeling or explain what that betrayal does to a woman or to a man, whatever the situation is. But for me, that betrayal is so big. And so I had to heal, and I had to do all the things, and I had to watch you do your work and get the help you needed. But I also had to, I wanted to keep a little bit of a wall up because I didn't want to get hurt again. And I didn't want to be put in that same position to be hurt again. And so I had to protect myself, and I didn't wait a long time. I never felt like I couldn't say it. I literally couldn't say, I forgive you. It took me 3.5 years to say that. And so for me, that was a really long journey, but I really needed to have that space. I needed to be able to see and trust you. And you did the work of the trust, of building trust again. And when I, went through some of that work, they explained it to me like they took a glass filled with, I think it was Skittles or M&Ms or something. They took a drinking glass, and then he smashed it on one of my therapists smashed it on the ground, and we just watched every bit of glass and all these M&Ms just fall all over the place. And he was like, that's what your husband did to you. And now you need to try and pick all that up. And it was like so overwhelming, but it was like, it could be done. And and he explained all of that to me, but it was just a beautiful visual for me to go, this is what you had done to our marriage, was took every piece that we'd had built for 19 years at the time, 18 years at the time. And it was just completely shattered. And so you had to do the work of putting all of that back together and not taking the pieces that were there. It was taking a new glass.
That's what we did. We took a new jar.
And we took new Skittles.
Marriage number 2.
Marriage number 2 was picking up and you dropping in the Skittle every chance you could.
I'm grateful. So we mentioned us doing our healing and us doing separate counseling. And if somebody's like, what did Laura have to do? I think it's informative to know that when you have been married to somebody that has been cheating, the mental toll that it takes on you is extraordinary. It's severe. And we didn't know some of the depths and the lengths of that until we started doing our own work.
Right.
So even though I was at fault completely in our marriage breakdown, you had to go get work and get help because of who in some ways you became because of me, because there was you are so strong where I feel like God spared your sanity, but it was this close.
Yeah.
And you you had to do work. So can you speak to that? Because there's people, what does that look like for a wife?
Well,
I'm actually really glad that they said that too, because Laura was traumatized by being manipulated and gaslit by Carl for all those years. And she was in a really high pressure position, also being the pastor of Hillsong New York's wife. And she grew up in Hillsong and in all of that environment. Like, she's been through trauma as well. So, yeah, of course she would need therapy after something like that.
things over the years, and you would like gaslight me, really, is what it's called. But it's basically taking what I think is reality and spinning it back on me, which happens all the time. It's not just, you know, it's a very common thing. But so within that, and then within the infidelity, the betrayal, I didn't know what it was, but it's called betrayal. It's actually called betrayal trauma that you deal with as a wife that goes through, who is the victim of infidelity. And I didn't know that was even a thing. So I found a therapist that specializes in betrayal trauma. And I didn't realize the amount of work that I needed to do, because I was a mess. Like, my mind, and they said, when you're gaslit the way you are in situations like that, it's more than just trauma. It's like torment, mental torment, physical torment on your brain. And so I had to unwind a lot of my own things that had gone on in my own head. And so that's where that's why I had to do my own work, because the trauma of betrayal is so full on for a person that you need to get therapy. We can push it off. Like, I could have kept going, probably.
We know people have tried that.
People try it and they keep,
well.
Trucking on. They still parenting and still doing the marriage thing and all of that. But it's so not healthy, and it's going to break down somewhere along the way. And you're also going to stay resentful and bitter and traumatized. And the trauma stays in your body.
Yeah.
We've learned a lot about the brain and what happens to your body.
For sure.
Yes. And that passes on to your kids. It passes on for generations until you can break it.
Yeah.
And so we chose to break it. And so I did my work, and I did a lot of therapy. I still do therapy.
Yeah. You know what's hard?
I love it.
You know what's hard?
You know what that trauma is also similar to? The trauma of being in a cult, like Hillsong, and being raised in a cult-like religion, in a cult-like system, in a cult-like environment. And so it's really interesting that they don't feel like that connection was made, or they don't seem to make that connection, or not publicly talk about it. Maybe they do a little bit behind the scenes. I feel like it's clear that they don't make that connection. And that can be common. Cult hopping is a common thing. Unpacking trauma from one situation and then repeating it in another situation is a thing. And if they are so focused on the adultery and not as focused on the system, I can see how they could think like, oh, this is the problem. Carl's childhood trauma and this adultery situation is the only issue. I could see how the systemic things are overlooked. But yeah, the trauma of that is very similar to the trauma of being in a cult. Cults gaslight you. Cults betray you. You are brainwashed in a sense, and there is severe trauma when leaving that. The other thing I wanted to address that she said was having the choice to go to therapy instead of just moving on. I do think that's important, and I think therapy is wonderful. And I think choosing to evaluate that and heal is wonderful. And some people don't have the resources to do that. And like, it's amazing if you can choose that for yourself. And it's, awful if you ignore that as a possibility when you do have the resources. But also some people don't have the resources, and it's hard and it's sad.
Part about that is, like, to go back to the Skittles thing, it's a terrible feeling to be the bad part of an illustration.
I bet.
And that's part of facing what you've done wrong. And you use the word torment. I remember someone looking at me eye to eye, a counselor, a therapist, and said, you've been tormenting your wife. That was tough. I felt like physically wanted to fight. I was always so hurt. So the last thing I wanted to hear was that. But once I reflected on us, that's exactly what I was doing.
And I think it's good for people who are listening,
Yeah.
for men who may be doing this, who think they can cover it up.
Yeah.
Because it happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They make mistakes, they cover it up. And a wife isn't stupid,
Mm-hmm.
but we want to trust as well. So it's not like a woman goes in and just stays there, because we want to believe what you're saying. And so for the men that is, or for the women, whatever side it is, but whoever is in a situation like that, and you are tormenting your spouse, please say something. Like, just get honest, be honest, stop lying to yourself, and be honest about it. Because I mean, the way you're living now, it's not going to go away.
You don't even know how bad it is.
Yeah, you don't know.
Yeah.
You think you're protecting them from your whatever you've done.
Yeah.
You are hurting them as you sit there in your lies. You're hurting them. And I just pray that people come forward and like get the help they need to break that. Because if you do have kids as well, you're passing it on.
Yeah.
It's a known thing that the trauma carries on.
The quicker you step up and face this stuff, the better. In that same vein, I remember Alex, my therapist, who I can't wait for people to meet her. She had said, why did you wait so long to be honest? And I was like, well, I didn't want to hurt my wife, and I didn't want to let people down. And she's like, oh, so you're the hero. She's like, you were tormenting her. You already let people down. You're hurting people. In my crazy broken mind, I'm going, oh, I'm doing this for valid reasons. I don't want the church to crumble, and I don't want people to be disillusioned, and I don't want Laura to be heartbroken. And so I'm going to push through this and somehow make it right. And one of the first steps of making things right is to admit exactly what you've done. And I wasn't being selfless. It wasn't for the greater good.
Right.
I stayed in lies because it was more convenient for me. And it was the selfish option that made sense to me. That's the truth.
Which is what, I mean, that's not just in infidelity. It's in anything that has a hold on you.
Yeah.
Like alcohol, like drugs, like whatever your vice is, like shopping, like whatever, social media, whatever your addiction or whatever is. That's what it does to people.
Yeah.
Damages them. Do you still believe, like, is what you preached, is it true? Is it real? Because I'm sure people have those questions as well.
Yeah.
Another good, real, juicy question. I wonder if it will be answered in a realistic way.
Like, is everything you've said a lie?
Very fair question. I've actually been in the position that people are in on that one. I've had men that I respect come out with secrets and lies. And I do know the feeling to a degree of what it's like to have a hero or somebody you look up to or trust, really. I could just use the word trust, not heroic. Somebody you put trust in and you found out that that's not true and their trust is broken. I am now in a position, part of the consequence of my action is that people have the right to question everything. Although logically, I could make a case that doesn't make sense because, when you're lying about something, it doesn't mean that everything in your life is a lie. But I understand why people would think that. I can say this about my preaching. I preached the truth. I preached about who Jesus is. I preached about the grace of God. I preached about stuff that's real. And so the preaching, what people heard, if someone was a part of our church, was any of it real? Yes, it was all real. I showed up the best I knew how to show up and gave it the best I could, dedicated my whole life to this, as did our family. And I just would hope that God would give people the grace to look at it through a human lens. Doesn't mean you accept anything. Doesn't mean that you make an excuse for me. It just means that you understand that, I was living on some lies. And what I preached, I believe with my entire whole heart. I actually look back now at what I preached and I say, at least preach the truth.
Yeah.
Because nobody can take that away. Nobody can bring me videos or something of some heretical thought. That's not our story. Our story is I preached the truth, and maybe I did it so passionately because I was running from my own demons.
Right.
I was running from my own lies. And but it's a great question, and I get it. For those that question everything I did or we were ever a part of, sorry I put you in that position. You were just asking on behalf of other people, is what I said true? Is the preaching real? Did you question the ministry side of things, when you found out that I had lies and I've been lying to you, did you think, oh, is this preaching that? Like, how did you handle that?
I really didn't. I don't think that ever even crossed my mind,
Hmm.
because I saw what you went through every week to preach, in terms of like, just the way you would prepare, the way you honored what you had to do and what you had to do to bring the word, what you had to do to prepare for a Sunday, and also the pressures that you were under, to outside of just even the stage. People I think preaching is just, you just get up there and you do your thing. Like, you would spend days and hours and weeks on a word, or on a message, and on a whatever you were doing. You took that very seriously, and you knew that was a heavy weight on you. So I never questioned that. I never thought that was, oh, he's a lot, like, what?
That's what I expected. That's really interesting, to never question the core of your belief systems, or the system that you were in, or the beliefs that you have, and how that played a role in this. And I think it's less that like people are wondering, were you preaching the truth? The issue is that as a pastor, according to your belief system, you should have, because you believed the correct way and did the correct things in that belief system, you shouldn't have fallen victim to adultery. You shouldn't have had that cognitive dissonance. You shouldn't have been tempted by the devil according to your own preachings. Like, there's a level of disconnect there. It's the hypocrisy that people have an issue with, not necessarily like what the Bible says. You were doing things in direct contradiction to what you should have been doing based on the position that you had. And you were basically saying Hillsong is a very prosperity kind of centered church. And because God was blessing you with all of these people and this revival and this monetary like success, you were having success in that area. So according to your own belief systems, that success was coming from you being a godly person, but you weren't being a godly person. You were lying and cheating and stealing and manipulating and perpetuating toxicity, and allegedly essaying and abusing and harming people. You hurt people. So it's not that like what you were saying on Sunday was just all a lie. It's that you were a lie. And so where was that disconnect? And how do you reconcile God giving you blessings and favor when you weren't doing the things that you said other people had to do in order to get those blessings and favor? Like, there's a disconnect there. You have to walk things back and think about it in a different way for any of what you just said to be true, which leads me to my final thoughts. Let's see what they have to say in this last minute of this podcast.
Because I know you're a human. You're not you know what I mean? Like, I didn't marry you because you were a preacher. I married you because I loved you and you're a human being. Like,
you are a human, but based on what you were saying, while you were a preacher, you were supposed to be doing things at least better than that. The bar's pretty low for preachers, in my opinion.
That just those two would never cross.
It's good to know. And maybe when we pick this conversation up, we'll talk about the rehab I went to and the counseling center that you went to. We can also talk about maybe our relationship to Brian Houston and to Hillsong Church, which a lot of people want to know about. And we'll just keep this conversation moving. Thank you for being so honest. This isn't easy, but it's needed.
Yeah.
So I love you. I appreciate you.
Love you.
So my final thoughts on this are, I do think the Lentzes have done work on their marriage. I do feel like they've addressed the infidelity issues. I don't even think that disqualifies them for wanting to be in community or wanting to help people or wanting to be healed behind the scenes. I do think there are so many questions left not addressed. I don't think they've looked at the systemic issues and how that played a role in what happened and how they were able to perpetuate those lies behind the scene. I don't think they have any understanding of power dynamics in this situation, because probably from what it sounds like, Carl's life and their marriage were so in danger of like not existing anymore, that they had to address these very specific things, and they haven't looked at any of the other ones yet. And they may in the future. I don't know. I don't know if that's something they'll ever look at in the future. My issue is, and everyone's issue is that I don't think that they should be again in positions of authority and power before they've looked at and understood how the system played a role in what happened. I'm not going to do a reaction video to the second part of this. They released another episode on the same day. They've done several since then. I'm not going to react to all of them because I just don't care to spend this much time thinking about the lenses. But I do know in that second post, they talked about Carl not really having the intention to be restored to ministry. Although every time he talks about it, he leaves it open. He's like, well, I don't know what God is going to do in my life, but the intention is not to be restored to ministry or as a pastor again. But he also said that he doesn't know what church is going to look like from here on out. And he doesn't know that like church is going to be the same thing as it was. And would he want to be a pastor if it changes? And what is that going to look like? So he is slightly interested in being in a position of teaching or preaching or authority or like guiding others in some way. And I did briefly watch him on another podcast. They've done a ton of podcasts as promo for their new venture. And he did say on the Breakfast Club podcast, which I think is another B-side podcast, that, you know, he kind of feels like he is preaching. They're just on a podcast and, you know, he's not a pastor, but he's still, you know, sharing a message and blah, blah, blah. And that's the exact problem. That's exactly what we have an issue with, because there's still things not addressed. There's still people that haven't been apologized to. There's still, I mean, I've said it a million times. I don't know why I keep saying it over and over again. You guys get the picture. I believe them in the things that they've unpacked. I think there's still so much left for them to unpack before they platform themselves again, before they speak to other people, lead other people in this way. He is positioning himself as an authority in some way, whether he thinks he is or not. Having that level of fame and attention and that platform to share what you're sharing puts him in a position to abuse that power again. And I think he's lost that right entirely for so many other reasons. Period. Bottom line. So that's it for now. I hope this was entertaining for you. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I always love to hear them. Make sure that you've subscribed and like this video if you found this informative or educational or entertaining, and hit the bell if you want notifications the next time I share something like this. And I will see you next time on No Culty Vibes. Bye.